We're honored to welcome two legends of the game and of Team Canada 1972, as they're here to relive and share some stories and memories of that iconic 8-game series against the Soviet Union, one of our nation's finest moments. One of the best skaters, first of all, to ever play the game. He won the Stanley Cup 8 times as a player, twice as the general manager. In 1969, became the first defenseman to ever win the Conn Smythe Trophy. He was also a 4-time All-Star, the creator of the Spinorama, was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1986. He played in games 2, 3, 6, 7, and 8. Team Canada did not lose any of those games. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege, my honor to welcome Serge Savard. Bonjour. Have a seat over here. And now, a 6-time Stanley Cup winner, a 5-time Vezina Trophy recipient, he was also named a first-team All-Star 5 times during his decade-long NHL career. Also a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame, and his number 29 was retired by Montreal. After his playing career, he was elected to Parliament representing York Centre from 2004 to 2011. He went 2-2 in the series, playing both the first game, 23 saves and a loss, and the last, 22 saves and a win. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Dryden. All right, tell you what, I'm going to give you guys the stage. I'll help facilitate this somewhat, but I am going to be welcoming any questions folks may have here about the Summit Series, about the 72 Summit Series, and about Montreal's last season. First of all, gentlemen, I'm going to give you a chance, first of all, to comment on Mr. Hockey himself with the passing of Gordie Howe. And I know, Serge, you have something you've been actually speaking about Mr. Hockey.
Well, Gordie Howe was really a dominant player before I joined the National Hockey League. In the 50 and early 60, they had a great team in Detroit. He was #1 player in the league. They won 4 cups. When I arrived in the league, I thought he was on his way down. But that's not the way it works. And when he went in the WHA and he signed with the Arrows to play with his 2 sons, we thought we'd get rid of him. But he came back, I think he was 50 or 51, and came back in Hartford. And he was, today it's sad that he passed away, one of the greatest players of all times. I would tell you, I don't think I would say those comments when I played against him. He was not the most likable player, but he was a great player, great player, and that's why they call him Mr. Hockey.
I wonder, I'd like to ask a trivia question to the audience, and I would just happen to look it up. Gordie Howe is known for the Gordie Howe hat trick. And who knows what a Gordie Howe hat trick is?
Wait, maybe, Ken, you should ask who does not know what a Gordie Howe hat trick is.
Okay, so we'll offer the answer that you would have answered, which is a goal, assist, and a fight in one game. Now, Gordie Howe played over 1,700 regular season games in the NHL. He played over 400 games in the WHA. Between the 2 leagues, he played over 200 playoff games. How many Gordie Howe hat tricks did Gordie Howe score? In around
Good question. Hold on. This lady seems
2,400 games.
Okay, hold on. This lady seems very adamant here. Hold on.
It's 2.
Is it 2, Ken?
The answer is 2.
Wow.
In 2,400 games, he had 2 Gordie Howe hat tricks. Now, for the person who got the right answer, or
Right
anybody
here.
else, who has the most Gordie Howe hat tricks in NHL history in regular season? Brendan Shanahan is right. Do you know how many he had? He had 17. Rick Tocchet in combined regular season and playoffs had 18. But Gordie Howe had only 2 Gordie Howe hat tricks in 2,400 games.
Let's ask these guys if they remember their anniversary date now.
You know, I had to keep up with this guy all those years in the dressing room.
Okay, let's talk a little bit now about the 72 Summit Series. We have to understand, and for those of you who are not old enough to understand what it was like to live at a time when there was a thing such as the Soviet Union, you weren't just playing in Russia. You were playing in the Soviet Union at that time, our mortal enemies. What were your thoughts as youngsters going into this very mysterious and cold place? Serge.
Well, it started before we get to Russia. You know, for all of us that played that series, looking back at this now, it's probably the best experience of our life, and I don't think any athletes can elevate themselves emotionally like we did in 1972. That was the first time that really we get together with other players. When I first came in the league, they told me you're not allowed to talk to those guys. If you meet a player, go the other side of the street. Don't talk to them. They're the enemy. And for us, playing with the same team than Phil Esposito and Bobby Clarke, which I didn't like. I didn't like. And I sat for a month and a half beside those guys in the same dressing room, and the second part of the tournament, you know, and we really became a team, and after that, I said, well, Phil is not that bad of a guy, and I became a good friend of Bobby Clarke, not on the ice, but off the ice. And if all you guys that are a little bit older, you look at Phil Esposito's career, and that was the highlight of his career. And I never seen Phil play as well as he did in 1972, and I played a lot against him. He was really emotional, and I've seen him once to stop a puck behind Cam Dryden, and he never done that in his whole life. That's
rarely inside our blue line.
So we didn't know what to answer your question, what to expect, because everybody told us we're not going to lose a game. You know, you guys are so good. You're not going to lose a game against those guys. We sent 2 scouts in Moscow and to see one game, and I think Tretiak gave up 6 or 7 goals that game, and they came back and they said, well, the goalie's no good. They don't shoot the puck. And all those reporters that were telling us, you're not going to lose a game. So we were so confident, even before the series, Harris Senden told everybody we were 35 players, and he says, everybody's got to play a game. So the first game in Montreal, we dressed 5 defensemen. That's something that you would never do in these days. The second part of the game in Montreal, the 7-3 games, the guy couldn't keep up. The guy couldn't keep up with those guys. If we dress just that fact, if we dress 6 defensemen, maybe we lose the game, but we don't lose 7-3.
Phil Esposito, and some of you will remember, I mean, he started his career in Chicago, and he was a good player in Chicago and becoming a better player in Chicago, but Chicago had Bobby Hull, and they had Stan Mikita. And Phil Esposito was going to be, at best, a third banana in Chicago. He goes to Boston, and he becomes a better player, but Bobby Orr is in Boston. And so he can never be anything other than a second banana in Boston. So then he comes to Team Canada in 1972. There's no Bobby Orr, there's no Bobby Hull, and really Phil was the best player on the team and was in a position where he probably didn't even consciously think about it, but really he was the guy. He was the guy that Bobby Hull had been in Chicago and that Bobby Orr was in Boston. And all of a sudden, at sort of big guy moments when that kind of player has to respond, he was the guy. And he's the one that that is the most vivid for me in that series. I mean, Paul Henderson scored those goals that were, fantastic, and we couldn't have done without them. But Phil was very much the spirit of that team. And when the occasion presents itself, you just can't know whether somebody's going to rise to it or not. And Phil did.
Now, I understand now this gentleman here, what's your name, sir?
Dennis McKenna.
And from which organization?
I'm from Paris, Ontario.
From Paris. All right. You were at one of the games?
I was at the first game of the Montreal Forum. It had to be 100 degrees in there. And when you guys went up 2-0, the place went nuts. And when the game was over, Eagleson wasn't a very happy camper. I remember that.
Do you remember the heat in that during that game, or did that even faze you?
Well, what I remember about that game was about 10 things before I remember the heat. It was all of the other problems and I don't even really remember the heat. Again, as Serge would say, that as he said about the defense and the amount of work that they would have had to do under those conditions, and being behind in the game and only being 5 of them, they would feel the heat more than I would. But it's all the rest. I mean, that if other things had worked better, it could have been 150 degrees, and who would have cared?
Dennis, what circumstances found you at that game? Were you living there?
No, there was the photographer, I believe, was John Martin, was in charge of photography for that tournament. And Brian Backel was the photographer taking the pictures for it. And he had sent 3 tickets home to his dad to give them out. And I worked in the printing department there, and nobody else wanted to go or couldn't afford to go, but I jumped at the chance, even though my wife was pregnant. And
and absolutely due that day.
And we flew down Saturday and flew back Sunday, but there was a couple of real great memories of going into the Montreal Forum and seeing guys like Belleville there, Toe Blake there in the stands, just guys you've seen on TV. And the other big thing that always stood in my mind, coming home Sunday night from the airport, there was a fellow in the airport reading the books on the top shelf, and I didn't know who he was, but he's the biggest man I ever saw, but it turned out to be Andre the Giant coming into Toronto to wrestle that night.
Well, I tell you what, we can keep the experience going. Obviously, that's one of the highlights in your life. The one thing you probably didn't get at that time was a picture with Ken Dryden and Serge Savard. Am I right?
That's correct.
Would you like one right now?
I certainly would.
All right, come on up with me, Dennis. Come on up. Where's our photographer? Come on up, Dennis. Where's our photographer? Ah, here she is. Okay. Come on right up. There you go. Now, Ken and Serge don't have their equipment on right now. I hope that's okay with you. Here we go.
Nice to meet you. Here, why don't you get in the middle?
There you go. A picture more than 3 decades in the making, and more than 4 decades in the making. All right, thank you so much. Thanks, guys, for doing that. Who else has a question? Oh, hold on here.
Ken, in the CBC documentary series, when they did that 8-part series, I always remember the one thing that you talked about going into Game 8, about how despite all the NHL games you played in Stanley Cup, about how you described yourself as being terrified heading into Game 8. Is that an experience you ever had before or since as an athlete?
No.
All right, thank you very much.
No, I mean, and you never, I mean, you don't know how you're going to feel before certain moments. And I had played and as Serge even more, I mean, playing in Stanley Cup playoff games. We had played before 72. In 1971, we had played 2 seventh games, one against the Bruins, one again in a Stanley Cup final against Chicago in a 7th game. So, that you kind of feel as if you're not likely going to feel any different than you did in those moments. But I can remember after the 7th game, when we came from behind and won, and I knew I was playing the 8th game, that from the moment that game was over, I could feel my legs kind of turn to jelly. And of trying to get through the next day, which was an off day, before getting to the day of the final game. And I had, I mean, like most people in this room, I mean, if you're a fan of one sport, you're a fan of them all. And I was a sports fan. I was a fan of baseball and basketball and football and everything. And I knew what happened in big moments and big championships, that there are heroes and there are GOATs. And my favorite team as a kid was the Dodgers. And I remember the stories of Ralph Branca, who was the pitcher for the Dodgers and who gave up a pennant-winning home run to Bobby Thompson of the dreaded Giants. And nobody ever forgot Ralph Branca. And I knew that that's the kind of thing that can happen. You could be the hero, like a Paul Henderson, or you could be the reverse. That's part of what was at stake in that last game. And I knew that it was possible that I would wake up the morning after the 8th game, and literally, and this is not intended as an overstatement, but as a fact, the most hated person in the country. That was possible. That was what was at stake. And not only that would be for that moment, but imagine if it had turned out that way, and the 72 series had been lost, then I would be Ralph Branca for decades, as Bill Buckner is Bill Buckner, for decades. Those are the stakes.
Most hated person in the country. And so that's why you got into politics then, maybe?
I'll tell you that after Game 8, politics was a breeze.
Serge, do you ever get butterflies in your stomach during that series, during the Summit series? Do you ever get nervous and kind of just scared?
Not really.
All right, thank you.
Not really. I always, as an athlete, sometimes you're a little bit nervous before the game. But me, all my career, as soon as the game starts, I never felt the pressure. I always thought we were going to win. I don't care which game we played. And when we were down, we had to win the last 3 games in Russia. I was convinced that we were going to win the last 3 games because we had a chance. We had a chance. We should have won the 5th games. We should have won in Winnipeg. We were ahead in Winnipeg. And who knows if we kept playing them for another 5 games. I'm convinced we would have won the next 5. So that's the way I feel as an athlete. I'm scared to lose, but I'm always very, very confident. Also, I saw on the big screen, you said teamwork, and that's what happened. That's why, it's not, this Team 72 is not the affair of Paul Anderson or Ken Dryden or Serge Savard. That was a real team effort. The whole team worked real hard. And I mean, there's guys that maybe you didn't even notice. A guy like Yvan Cornway, he probably played the best hockey of his career. And if you don't score the second last goal, maybe you don't even talk about Paul Anderson for the rest of your life. Yvan was a big guy in that series. Everybody was.
Okay.
You're both great men and great Canadians. What would you want your grandchildren to remember about you, both to Serge and to Ken?
Well, I'm going to tell you one thing that I heard from one of the greatest hockey player, and I felt very, very small beside him. His name is Jean Beliveau, and before he died, a few months before he died, they asked him, Jean, if you want to be remembered, what you want to be remembered with? What? He says, I want to be remembered as a team player. He didn't say 500 goals or 10 Stanley Cup or 9 Stanley Cup. He didn't say that. He says, I want to be remembered as a team player. And that's what they taught us in Montreal when I arrived on the team. That was team first. That's why I really like your logo, it together. You're nothing with, if you have a 50 goal scorer and he's not a team player, you're not going to win. There's guys in this league that never won a cup in their life and score 50 goals for a year for many years. So that's if I think I would like my children to remember me as a good team player. I don't think I can say anything different than Jean Beliveau.
I don't think you beat that answer. I don't think there's a better answer than that. I think that when you arrive in Montreal, and when you arrived in Montreal at that time, you didn't arrive necessarily as a winner. I mean, you probably had some experiences winning, but the Montreal teams won most of the time then. And you needed to learn that expectation and learn that ambition from others who were there, and just as you hope that those that would come after you might learn the same thing from you. But you learned really right away in Montreal that it really was about the cup. And that a successful year was not a year that you scored 50 goals and that you won the regular season and that you went to the finals. A successful year, a Canadiens year, was winning the cup. That's what it was. And moving outside of Montreal for a second, one of the things that I really enjoy watching after a cup is won, and maybe we'll see that happen, a night or so from now, is the interviews in the dressing room afterwards. And so they'll bring up the star players and tell you about the goal that you got and you won the Conn Smythe Trophy and this and that. And almost instantly, that player will stop talking about the goal they scored and the Conn Smythe Trophy they won, and they'll start talking about, they'll say, what about Fred over? Wasn't Fred fantastic? And Jimmy over here. I mean, did you see the shot that he blocked and this and that? And we're all selfish people. We all like good things to happen to ourselves. But we all come to learn at some point that the 50 goals feels great. But there is nothing like the feeling of winning the cup. And you watch these players at that moment, they become unbelievably generous because they know that whatever it is they did, no matter how good a player they are not going to win the cup by themselves. They are in everybody else's hands, and everybody else is in their hands, and that's the pleasure of it.
All right.
My
Very well.
Just one comment about this. My very first game, not first game in the season, I broke in the Montreal Canadiens. That was Toe Blake last year, and the very first game of the season, I remember his speech like yesterday. He told the players, he says, if we don't give more than 180 goals against, I guarantee you we will finish first. So I came from an organization that a goals against was just as important as a goals for, maybe more.
All right. One last question.
Most of the people in this room have been involved with minor hockey for many, many years. In fact, if you add it collectively, it's thousands of years. What would you say today we're doing well for hockey in Canada, and where can we improve?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, one of the things that it is a completely different experience now than it was when we were playing minor hockey. When I was playing minor hockey in Toronto for Humber Valley, and I started at age 7 in the first year of Humber Valley and played for Humber Valley all the way through to Junior B. I remember, because I wrote it down, each game that we played in a season, we played 50 games, all in. I mean, that we might have had 1 or 2 exhibition games. There were no tournaments. We played, the playoffs. We didn't win, but we would make the finals so that we would play almost the maximum number of games that anyone could play. And that was it. The full season was 50 games, all in, starting towards the end of September, ending about the end of March. And you couldn't do more. There were no other tournaments to go to. There were no summer hockey camps. There were no special clinics. And so at that particular time, in order to make it to the top, that's what you had to do. You didn't have to do more. You couldn't do more. There wasn't more to do. And that enabled you to make it to the top. Now you know what the experience is. It's far more games, far more practices, a much longer season, basically 11 months a year, no other sports, off-ice training as well as on-ice training. It is completely different. And what also, and part of the effect of that is, of course, it means it is that huge commitment for the whole family. It isn't just a commitment for the kid, it's the commitment for everybody. And it's not just a commitment of time, but it's a commitment of money. And the more anybody commits to something, the more they feel as if they have certain rights that they might not have had if they committed less. And so what I find with minor hockey now is the tone of minor hockey, to a much greater extent than before, is set by the parents rather than the kids. And because they have this immense stake in not only their child and their child's life, but all of the time, all of the money, and all of the rest of it. It's different. And of course, what happens now is that in order to make it to the top, that's the kind of commitment you need to make. It used to seem as if in order to develop the peak of the pyramid, you needed a vast base of a pyramid to do it. You needed hundreds of thousands of players to produce the 100 and 200, 500 players at the top. What we've learned over time is you don't. You can have a narrow base of those that are really committed at the bottom in order to produce the narrow pinnacle at the top. And so it ends up changing the dynamic of minor hockey, where you've got that elite player putting in all of that time, committing all of that money and all the rest of it, and they have the chance of making it to the top, and all of the others have less and less chance as the years go on. So it's different. It's hugely different, and with implications. And the question is that, how do you deal with those? How do you live with them? And so on. I do know that because of that commitment, like for instance, I played all kinds of sports, and I was able to do that put a lot of time into school. I couldn't do that today. I went to law school while I was playing for the Canadians. Couldn't do that, today. I played baseball. I couldn't do that today. It's different. And I don't know whether it's better or worse, but I do know it's different.
All right. Serge, I'll give you a chance to
Pretty good answer.
answer that.
Well, I'm going to take another angle. It's all true what he said, and I know a little bit about minor hockey. The big change, I want it to become from the top, from the National Hockey League. I was always against violence in hockey. I was always against fighting in hockey. And today there's maybe less fight, but there's a lack of respect. All the kids that came here, they talk about respect. The 5 kids, that's what they talk about, respect. Respect the other players, the other team, the coaches. When a guy runs somebody from behind and risks to paralyze the kid for the rest of his life, that has no place in hockey. And when you have the commissioner of the, I know you wrote an article about that, and it was a great article, when the commissioner of the league up to 2 years ago said that fighting was part of the game. He's not saying that now because of the lawsuit in hockey. But for the future, what I want, I want to be able to tell my grandchildren that you don't have to learn how to fight to play hockey.
Well said.
Can I just
Yes,
say one
please
thing?
go ahead, Ken. Yep.
One thing quickly on that. Just to pick up on what Serge is saying, I think that the most significant issue in all of sports now is head injuries. And whether it's in hockey or in football or even in soccer and in some other games. And a few years ago, people talked about it as if it was an epidemic, as if it was something that would come and go. It's not. It is a part of a game, and for a lot of the reasons that Serge talked about, that kind of, the running from behind in it. And the biggest change, I think, in all of hockey, and it starts at the NHL, is the game goes faster. And it's not that the skaters are faster than Serge would have been, but the shifts are so much shorter. Serge would have been, or a forward at the time, would have played a minute, a little bit more. Now it's 35 seconds. And in 35 seconds, it means it's a relay race, that you pass the baton to the next guy every 35 seconds. And it's full sprint the whole period until period stops, the second period starts. And no red line. I mean, you pass right up to the far blue line. The red line only exists for icing. It just goes faster. It's not so much, I don't think, the bigger players, although the players are a little bigger, but the players move faster. There are more collisions. There are more forceful collisions. It's harder to avoid a collision. And we absolutely know the impact of a blow to the head. No fooling around, no messing around, no pretending. It's not nice. And you all know that. You may have seen your kids and what they feel like, for the next week or so. You know the stories of the others. It's not a come and go thing. It is, I think, the central issue for all of sports, finding ways to eliminate the hit to the head. However it happens, now it's, he had his head down a bit, he was crouched a little bit, finding all kinds of, we used to be able to, pick off the guy who had his head down. It's not about picking off a guy with a head down now. It's about a blow to the head, however it happens. A stick to the face now is an automatic penalty just because it's a stick to the face. Well, that a hit to the head, unless and until it starts to be understood as automatically something that doesn't happen, then we're all running a risk that we don't want to run. And I, like Serge, want my grandkids to be able to play hockey, to get the kind of absolute pleasure and the kind of experience that all of us as adults have had, and to be able to do so going into the future with the full possibility of living that wonderful future that is otherwise in them.
Well put.
And that all goes back to respect. All goes back to respect. If we just remember that R word, it would go a long way. Get to know the memories from their locker room and away from the rink, their hilarious stories about each other. Learn why these men became historic worldwide celebrities in their own right, unquestionably one of Canada's finest moments. Starting in September, the players will tour the 4 Canadian cities that hosted the first half of the Summit Series, including Toronto. The evening will include a retrospective by 8 superstars, as you've heard them before, including as you've never heard them before, I should say, including an interactive opportunity for those in attendance to direct their questions to the players. We ask you to look at the video screen.
One stage, one giant screen, 8 star players. Get the real stories off ice and inside the dressing room. 72 Summit Series Tour.
Cleared over on the far side. And back to the bar. Makes a shot third. It's going to be a passing ball here. Anthony to shoot.
One night only, September 10th, Sony Center.
And now we want to conduct a draw choosing 2 ballots for Authentic Team Canada 72 jerseys. One of Serge Savard, one of Ken Dryden. In fact, you can still smell the sweat in them. All right, for the Serge Savard jersey, Patty Haddon. You guys gotta learn to write better. I gotta tell you that. From the New Hamburg Hockey Association, come on up here. And okay, Craig Milbury from Greater Fort Erie. Come on up. And be presented with your jerseys. In the meantime, let's ask Rob and Richard to join us on stage. Serge. The Serge jersey, yeah. Congratulations.
Before Serge and Ken leave the stage, on behalf of the Ontario Minor Hockey Association, and I know I can speak for everybody in this room, we enjoyed the time you shared with us, the stories you've shared with us, and I just want to thank you very much. We appreciate the time you've taken to be here with us, and I think, as I said, everybody in the room appreciates you here. Thank you very much.